So I'm James Douglas. I work in the built environment sector, especially in the property and construction sector, and I work for a global company called Lendlease, where I am the head of sustainability and have responsibility for many things, but amongst them carbon, which you'll see as part of this main discussion. I'll hand over to Alfredo.
Yes, very briefly, thank you, James. My name is Alfredo Carrato. I'm based out of Madrid, and I belong to Cemex Ventures, the corporate venture arm and open innovation platform of Cemex, the building material supplier.
Okay, so if we move to the first slide, Alfredo. I'm going to do the initial part of this presentation, and then Alfredo will pick up some specific examples. We are just starting with a lot of things that people have already said during all of this, but because this is my life at the moment and everything that I'm driving, I just wanted to put some more detail. We have heard mention of net zero carbon and achieving that by 2050. We've done some work to look at the various temperature rises, and we believe here within the UK and with my company that 2050 is too late. And you'll see that I'm using the language here of transformational approach. We actually believe 2030. I know earlier Sebastian said 2035, but we actually believe to achieve a 1.5 degree limit to temperature rise, 2030 is the date. And to do that is going to take a transformational.
Fully agree, yeah.
Say that again, Sebastian.
I fully agree with you. I'm absolutely with you.
But you'll notice that underlying transformational change, because to achieve that's going to require significant change across lots of areas. There's a stat there, the building sector, and there's various numbers around the globe. If you do go and look for it, you'll see lots of numbers, but the one that comes up more often is the contribution of about 30% of the carbon emissions come from the building sector, and that's during the construction and operation of a building. What I mean by operation is obviously when it's in use, when we're living in it, or when it's a commercial building, when people are in there. The startling fact, and this is something that's been modeled on many occasions by lots of companies, is building is just going to continue. The circular economy argument that we heard earlier is very relevant to this, but building is going to continue and continue and continue, and the proportion of emissions associated with the built environment is going to grow. If you move to the next slide, Alfredo. So what we thought about, and with the topic, there's a couple of challenge areas that we really wanted to get to the mind front and center. If you look at smart buildings, and this is a concept that's already around at the moment, and there's things happening in this space. So I will acknowledge that. But the basic principle, and this is why smart buildings came about, it's the need to look outside of just the four walls of a building and bring in the impact of climate change as part of that discussion. There are other factors that you'd bring into that, but this focus is climate change. There's a bit there, what the buildings of the future must do, and I'm not going to go into great detail, but obviously the buildings of the future must try and get to that zero carbon position as early as possible throughout the life cycle of the building. The second challenge that we identified, and this really, we called it construction, but it's really about the materials that go into our buildings and the embodied carbon that's associated with those materials. We have to find lower carbon solutions for materials. The circular aspect to that comes in from the earlier discussion as well. Lots of these subjects that have been announced today are very linked. But the challenge for us is to continue to find lower carbon solutions. And there's a key word there, they have to be deliverable. Market forces come into play. People do not like to pay more cost for this at the moment. So there's other discussions there about taxing, etc. But there's a way through this. We've already seen it, and Alfredo will go through some examples, but there needs to be more done. So if you keep this in mind, these are the challenge areas that we want to focus on. If we move onwards, these are a couple of the opportunity areas that we've identified, and if people don't understand the terms, please let me know and I'll explain it at the end. But in the smart building space, we do want to improve building performance using digital enabled systems. That already happens, but more can be done. There's automation aspects, and there's data to drive behavioral change. In the construction space, I've mentioned the materials and innovation to reduce embodied carbon, but also the increasing adoption of digital techniques in construction. It's happening, but it's happening in a very slow space. The modern methods of construction, Alfredo will touch on later with an example and what that is, but that's a really important aspect and that can draw lots in place. Moving onwards, just to give you an idea who's involved in this, and this is really an important question. It actually affects us all. We all exist within buildings, but there's pressure from governments, there's pressure from the occupiers, there's pressure from society at large towards the sector. The sector itself, and as I'm part of that, I can really hold my hand to this. The sector itself is very keen to make huge advances across this area. There's lots of commitments coming out around the globe at the moment, but are they fast enough? In my mind, they're not. We need to be faster. If we jump forward, Alfredo, just some of the outcomes. If you think of the two challenge areas, some of the outcomes that we've considered, although there are always more outcomes that could be achieved, we're looking to try and work out what a true smart and sustainable building is. What are those opportunities? We would like to leverage the experience of the FightBack community. You don't need to be in the built environment sector. We're looking for the knowledge from everywhere to try and bring it into the sector and make it better, with an overall outcome of delivering that lower carbon approach to buildings. Bearing in mind that I did say it need to be transformational, we're not, whilst incremental change is needed, we are looking for those ideas that may be significant change. If we move one slide forward, I think we move into the solutions, and this is where I hand over to Alfredo.
Yeah, so thank you very much, James, and tying in with your discourse, I think that these two examples that I'm about to present tie in very well with what has been described earlier. This first company, which is based out of the UK and belongs to our portfolio, specifically tackles that smart building challenge that was mentioned earlier through generative design, and also a way to use digital parameters to measure not only returns on investment, but also sustainability related aspects. With that in mind, and through the optimization of different parameters that do affect not only the construction of a building, but also its operation and maintenance phase, this specific solution then uses that information to create a specific kit of parts that would be manufactured off-site, and that also relates to that new methods of construction that were also described earlier, so that the final product has a lower carbon impact on the environment through specifically tackled items such as, the panels and the different materials that are employed, the traceability of those, the reduction in waste generation, and also the optimization of logistics that bring the different materials to site and their construction to be able to grow the actual buildings. Secondly, and now speaking about the second challenge that was described, new materials also need to be created that have a lower carbon footprint, and that in some cases, if not all, should be recycled from our surroundings. And in that regard, Cemex recently also invested in this company named Darklight that recycles plastic waste and converts it into smart gravel that can be used at a later stage in ready-mix concrete. With that in mind, and taking into account the global footprint of ready-mix concrete in the industrial world, which accounts for almost 8% of global emissions, we think that through these kind of partnerships and investments, we aim to lower our carbon footprint as a building material supplier and hit those ambitious milestones that we have all been discussing earlier to be able to reach net zero or carbon neutrality in the next couple of years. So just through these two examples, we wanted to highlight those two big challenges that we have in mind. And as a FightBack community, we should all be aware that we need to mobilize all the different resources that we have at reach and work jointly to tackle a problem that not only affects us, I mean, a particular industry or a particular company, but that affects us all as citizens of this world. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm now open to Q&A.